September 30th, 2022. A 34-year-old army captain walks into a palace he was never trained to run. His name is Ibrahim Traoré. Behind him, a coup inside another coup, foreign sanctions closing in within weeks, a security crisis eating away at huge parts of his own territory, and a diplomatic corps drafting the obituary for his government before it turns 1 year old. Almost nobody believed he would survive 12 months. Watch this number, 94. That is how many tons of gold Burkina Faso pulled out of its own ground in 2025. A record, worth $1.4 billion flowing straight into state coffers instead of foreign shareholders' accounts. Watch this number, 90. That is how many days it took to build a 50-megawatt power plant from bare ground to fully operational, a project that almost anywhere else takes years. Watch this number, 10. That is how many percentage points this country added to its national electrification rate in 3 years, after sitting stuck near 20% for a generation. None of that was supposed to happen. Not under sanctions, not with equipment stuck at ports for 2 years at a time, not from a country ranked 207th in the world for electricity access, fighting an active insurgency, with almost no goodwill left from the institutions that usually write these stories. And yet, right now, this same country is finishing an electric vehicle plant, reviving a national brewery left for dead, milling its own flour from its own wheat for the first time in living memory. So here is the question this story is built around. How does a nation this boxed in, sanctioned, encircled, written off, end up building faster than nations with none of those obstacles? Something does not add up. Unless the story you have been told about this country was never the full story. By the time we reach the gold mines, the power grid, and a diaspora quietly wiring home $148 million, you will understand why we call this the most dangerous idea in Africa right now. Dangerous to whom? The answer is not who you think. For generations, this continent's story was written by other people. Cashews grown in Bobo Dioulasso, shipped out raw, cotton picked by Burkinabe hands, spun into thread somewhere else. Gold pulled from Burkinabe soil, refined in vaults thousands of kilometers away, then sold back at a markup to the people who grew, picked, and mined it. For decades, this was not trade. Trade means both sides walk away, better off. This was extraction dressed up as partnership. Children in Ouagadougou grew up watching trucks leave the country full and come back empty. That is the wound this story begins with. Not poverty, not a lack of resources, a lack of control over resources that were never scarce to begin with. So when we say Burkina Faso is industrializing, understand what that word means here. Not factories for their own sake. A homecoming. A nation deciding, after generations of being told what it cannot do, to decide for itself what it can. Nowhere is that clearer than in a brewery. SN-BRAFASO was not just a business. It was a name people grew up with on delivery trucks, on bottle caps, on the local football sponsor board. When it failed, it cost more than jobs. It cost belief. When the government brought it back, they answered a question that had been sitting quietly for years. Can we still do this ourselves? The answer was yes, and they did not stop there. Over 50 billion CFA francs raised not from a foreign bank, but from Burkinabe citizens through the Patriot Loan, a diaspora bond now funding an entirely new industrial facility for the brewery in Bobo Dioulasso. That is not aid. That is not a loan with strings attached from an institution thousands of kilometers away. That is family investing in family. If a brewery carries that much symbolic weight, imagine what an electric vehicle plant means. The ETUA electric vehicle plant sounds small on paper, an assembly line, a partnership, a first phase. But for over a century, the story of the automobile in Africa has been the story of import. Ships arriving, showrooms opening, foreign brands, foreign profits. Burkina Faso just said not anymore. Yes, the first vehicles are being assembled with Chinese support. Nobody is pretending otherwise. But the goal is not permanent dependence. It is local design capability. A Burkinabe engineer 10 years from now drawing up a car built for African roads without asking permission from anyone. That is the difference between buying your way into modernity and building your way into it. One leaves you dependent forever, the other leaves you free. While the world debated whether a Sahelian nation could pull off an EV plant, the fields around it were already changing, because sovereignty means nothing if people are hungry. For years, the pattern was the same. Grow the maize, grow the soybeans, ship them out, then import processed food to feed your own people. Absurd. And it happened for decades because nobody with power had the will to stop it. The AgroServe Industries SA complex is the answer. A facility processing local maize and soybeans into food that Burkinabe families put on their own tables. No foreign middleman skimming the difference. Farmers get a market that does not vanish when global prices shift. Families get food that does not carry the hidden cost of a journey halfway around the world. But industrialization here did not stop at factories. It reached into culture itself. Traditional medicine. Over 80% of the population still relies on traditional healers. Not by choice, but because modern medicine was never truly accessible. Instead of treating that as an embarrassment, this government treated it as a resource. 53 traditional herbal products have now been formally approved. Knowledge passed down through generations of healers finally validated, regulated, integrated into the national healthcare system. This is decolonization as paperwork. Laboratories testing what grandmothers already knew. And if traditional medicine was a quiet revolution, gold was anything but quiet. For years, African gold followed the same script. Foreign companies arrive, extract, leave with the profit, and the nation that owned it keeps a small percentage and a hole in the ground. Captain Traoré refused to read from that script. We can mine our own gold. 4 words that sent shockwaves through boardrooms thousands of kilometers away. Permits revoked, contracts re-examined. A new principle written into policy. The wealth beneath Burkina Faso soil belongs first to the people standing on it. In 2025, artisanal mining alone produced a record 94 tons of gold, generating $1.4 billion for the state, not a foreign shareholder. There is a plan for a sovereign investment fund built from these revenues, so the gold mine today builds the schools and hospitals of tomorrow. That is the difference between extraction and stewardship. But none of it means anything if the lights do not turn on. You cannot run a brewery in the dark. You cannot assemble a vehicle without electricity. You cannot process cereal, weave cotton, or refine gold without power in the wires. That is exactly the wall this administration hit the moment it started building. Here is the number that should stop you cold: 20%. For years, that was roughly all the electricity access Burkina Faso had. Not 20% of homes lacking a backup generator. 20% of the entire population having any reliable access to power at all. In 3 years, the national electrification rate climbed 10 full percentage points under sanctions, fighting an active insurgency, with international creditors offering zero grace. That is not a gift from a foreign donor with a ribbon-cutting ceremony. That is a government deciding the lights coming on was the precondition for everything else in this story. Start with a 50-megawatt thermal power plant built in 90 days, not 90 weeks. 90 days. Groundbreaking to connection to the grid. Right behind it, a second thermal plant in Bobo Dioulasso, backed by 33 billion CFA francs, now nearing completion. Alongside the thermal plants, the Zena solar power plant, 26.6 megawatts, now at financial close. Sun, wind, and heavy fuel deliberately diversified, so no single point of failure plunges the country back into darkness. But here is where you understand what this administration was actually up against. ECOWAS sanctions made importing heavy machinery and critical components extraordinarily difficult. Equipment ordered in 2022, the year Traoré took power, did not arrive until 2024. Some vital equipment is still stuck at port right now. Any government could have used that as an excuse. Instead, they built anyway with what made it through and with partners willing to respect the country's right to develop on its own terms. Now, step back and look at the full picture. A nation at 20% electrification, ranked near the bottom of the entire world, under sanctions, under active threats, with equipment stuck at ports for years, and in 3 years, 10 percentage points of new electrification, a 50-megawatt plant built in 90 days, a second thermal plant nearing completion, a solar project at financial close, a $300 million plant on track to cut import dependence in half by 2027. And if the near-term story is thermal plants and solar fields, the long-term story is something almost nobody expected from a sanctioned Sahelian nation. A memorandum of understanding with Russia's Rosatom, a nuclear power plant. Target 2030. A country that 3 years ago could not guarantee electricity for a majority of its people is now working toward becoming a nuclear power producer. That is not incremental. That is a nation planning in decades, not electoral cycles. And there is the Po-Kaporo Dam, a project communities had been waiting for since the 1960s. 6 decades. Completed under Traoré in 8 months. Nearly 1.1 million cubic meters of water now feeding agriculture and fish farming, closing a debt owed to ordinary people who had almost stopped expecting it to ever be paid. Picture a small clinic on the outskirts of a provincial town, a nurse working by lantern light, rationing candles, hoping the vaccines in the cooler stay cold enough for the next child who needs them. Every blackout was a countdown against spoiled medicine, against help arriving too late in the dark. Now, picture that same clinic the week the grid finally reaches it. A refrigerator that hums through the night, a light that stays on after dark. That is what a 10-point jump in electrification means, translated out of percentages and into daily survival. This is the part where most documentaries stop and marvel. We are not stopping there, because this is not just Burkina Faso's story. It is a blueprint. It proves energy sovereignty is achievable from 20% electrification if the political will treats power as a foundation, not an afterthought. It proves food sovereignty is achievable when farmland is matched to processing capacity. It proves mineral sovereignty is achievable when a state operates its own mines instead of licensing the ground to the highest bidder. It proves cultural and economic sovereignty are the same project wearing different clothes, a magistrate's robe, a recognized herbal remedy, and it proves a diaspora scattered across continents is a resource to invite home, not forget. The Patriot loan raised 85 billion CFA francs, $148 million, from Burkina people scattered across the world choosing to invest in a home they still believe in. The international community did not expect any of this. Many outside observers reacted to the transition with open hostility, predicting collapse. What is emerging 3 years later is quiet, careful observation instead. The Africa Finance Corporation did not commit $300 million to a hostile fantasy. Rosatom did not sign a nuclear memorandum with a government it expected to collapse. These partnerships exist because results exist, and results are hard to argue with. Picture 2030, the nuclear plant's target date, a grid no longer dependent on imports for the majority of its supply, an EV plant beginning to design vehicles itself for African roads, African budgets, a generation of children, toddlers the week Traoré took office, starting secondary school in a country where we can build it ourselves is not an aspiration anymore. It is just how things are. That is the real payoff here. Not a single factory, not a single gold mine. A changed starting point for an entire generation's imagination, because the resource that was always scarcest on this continent was never gold or oil or cotton or uranium. It was belief. The belief, held firmly enough by enough people in power, that African nations could build for themselves without waiting for permission. Burkina Faso just proved belief was never the hard part. The hard part was deciding to act on it. Somewhere in Bobo Dioulasso, a young woman sits at a loom in the new artisanal cotton center, learning a craft her grandmother knew but never turned into a business of her own. Somewhere in Yako, a miner walks onto a state-owned site for the first time. Somewhere near Ouagadougou, a family's home is connected to the grid for the first time this year, and the first night the lights come on is a night none of them forget. Somewhere abroad, a Burkinabe nurse or engineer bought into the Patriot loan not for the return, but because investing in home finally felt like something worth doing. Statistics move minds. People like these move history. And a shift like this, once it takes root in enough individual lives, becomes very difficult to reverse. You can sanction a government, you can pressure a leader, you can flood headlines with predictions of collapse, but you cannot easily unteach a generation that their country can build its own cars, mill its own flour, mine its own gold, and power its own hospitals. That belief has already changed, and once belief changes, policy follows, resources follow, results follow. Because a population that believes it can build demands, sooner or later, a government that lets it try. That is why we called Burkina Faso the most dangerous idea in Africa at the start of this story. Dangerous not to Burkinabe people, not to their neighbors, dangerous to the old story that said patience, dependency, and permission were the only realistic paths forward. That story is dying in real time, whether the world is ready to admit it or not. The journey is far from finished. The security challenges have not disappeared. This is not a fairy tale with a bow tied around it, and we will not pretend otherwise, but the direction is set. By 2030, if this trajectory holds, Burkina Faso will not just be a nation that survived an extraordinarily difficult chapter. It will be a nation that used that chapter to build the industrial and energy foundation most of its peers spent decades failing to build in far easier conditions. The vision belongs to Burkina Faso. The lesson belongs to all of us. We have the resources. We have the talent. And as this story proves, one decision, one government, one determined 3-year sprint at a time, we have always had the will. The only question left is which nation writes the next chapter and how soon they decide to start. If this is the Africa you want to see more of, stay with Voice of Africa, because we are going to keep telling these stories, one nation at a time, one victory at a time. This is not a story of victimhood, this is a story of victory still being written, 1 megawatt, 1 ton of gold, 1 meter of woven cloth at a time, and we are just getting started.